minutes, our look back at election 88 continues with a speech by Libertarian presidential candidate Ron Paul. He addressed students at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, this past January.
I'm delighted to be here at Drake University. It's great to meet with young people. If there's any hope for the country, it's going to be with you. This country faces a lot of problems, and a political campaign is a time when we can discuss those problems, discuss alternatives. If you're very happy with what you're having and you're satisfied with the politics of the day, then I'm sure you wouldn't even be here. You wouldn't be interested in politics, and you certainly wouldn't come and visit with a candidate that has different views. Different views because they're not the common views. They're not unusual views. They happen to be the views of the Founding Fathers. They happen to be the traditional American views, but they just don't happen to be the conventional views of the current day, mainly because they're not taught in the universities. We have been taught now for several decades that the government's purpose is to regulate and run the economy, to tell people how to live and tell all other countries how to live as well. We have accepted the idea of interventionism. Interventionism in the economy, interventionism as far as the personal lifestyles of individuals go, as well as this idea that we know what's best for everybody. And what has it gotten us? It's gotten us a runaway deficit, $220 billion per year, a national debt of $2.5 trillion, a stock market that has just crashed, inflation that is uncontrollable, interest rates that are too high, a housing market that's crashing, and who knows what it means for you in the next year or two when it comes to getting a job. So it isn't esoteric, it isn't theoretical politics that we're talking about. We're talking about the real McCoy. We're talking about what's going on in this country. A lot of people know there's something wrong. They certainly woke up last October when the stock market crashed. When the stock market dropped 500 points in one day, Washington seemed to perk up their ears. Wall Street certainly perked up their ears to thinking there was something wrong. But you know there's an explanation for all that. It's just not a mysterious thing. It's not bred into the system. The socialists, and especially the Marxists and even the interventionists, would have us believe, and I'm quite sure that most of your economics classes will teach, that that is a natural consequence of the free market system, that you have to have boom periods and bust periods. But that happens to be a consequence of a bad monetary system. It's correctable and it's preventable. So therefore, we have to think about those things that might change things. I first got involved in politics a few years back. I am a practicing physician. I deliver babies. I'm an obstetrician. I finished my residency in 1968. I opened up my medical practice down in Lake Jackson and practiced medicine there for about 5-6 years before I decided there was something wrong. At that particular time, during that period of time, some financial events were occurring, especially in monetary affairs, which was the breakdown of the international monetary standard, that is the Bretton Woods Agreement. Because the Austrian economists, those are the free market economists, predicted that we would be moving into an era of very bad times with a high inflation rate and the violent business cycle and even recession or depression. I became fascinated with this. And they became convinced also that they had the right explanation. So in 1974, I announced I would run for Congress. And of course, I was the pessimist, and I was very negative about it, and very sarcastic, and said, nobody cares, nobody will listen, nobody will pay any attention. I went before the people in Texas and presented the views I'll be presenting to you tonight, and talking about free enterprise system, individual liberties, civil liberties for the individual, as well as a non-interventionist foreign policy. And quite frankly, I didn't think anybody would pay any attention. I ended up being elected to Congress for 4 times. It was rather disruptive to my medical practice, to say the least. But it was fascinating because I had to really take a stand which was quite opposite of the status quo of Washington. In some ways it was exciting, it was very interesting, but it was also a bit nerve-wracking in time, because there were times when I'd have to vote in the Congress that would be 420 to 1, because my opinion was different. My opinion was different. You know, what would you think of a politician today here in Iowa that would deliberately vote against any special interest or special funding for the state or the district? Well, you say, he's crazy. Besides, that's what I want. I want to get the funding. You know, I need the funding for the farmers. I need the funding for the students. I need the funding for the highways. I need the fundings for this. But to say that that is not the purpose of government, you would say, well, that's not a very popular stand. We don't care about this so-called oath that we take, the swear to uphold the Constitution. What we're concerned about as citizens is we want to know what we're going to get. We're going to send the congressman there to get what he can. Well, that's the way the system generally works. But I sort of defied that system. I went up and voted, and when it came to the special projects, even for my district, I opposed them on principle. But lo and behold, to my surprise, instead of that making it very damaging to me in my political career, the last time I ran for Congress, my political opponent, my Democratic opponent, dropped out of the race, which meant that I could have stayed and presented these ideas, because people will respond in a positive way if you explain to them why you're doing it and what you're doing. The libertarian message is very precise. There is a concept of government that is different than the concept of government today. It blends with what was written in the Constitution. And that concept is that government should be limited. I mean, if you look at the Constitution, you will find out that most of it says the government shall not have power to do such and such. And if the power isn't given to the government, they can't do it. And I took that oath seriously when I took an oath that said I would uphold the Constitution. Now, the libertarian says that he bases the principle on the fact that we promised never to use aggression against another individual. That sounds easy. Most people in this room would agree. Yeah, I agree with that. That means we're not going to use violence. We're not going to steal and rob and cheat and do these kind of things. Everybody believes in that. But we take that same principle of non-aggression against another individual and we apply it to the government. Now, that's the part which seems so strange. Oh, no, we know it's wrong to steal from our neighbor, but our congressman, that's his job. That's his purpose. I mean, we don't really care about this oath of office. What we want to know is how much he can get back for us. How many things can we get? How much money can he get? And every popular politician, if you ask him, what did he do for the district? Does he say, I got you more freedom? I got you less taxes? No, he says, I got such and such project for my district. As long as that's the measurement of the success of a politician, you can expect the economy and the political system to get much, much worse. And you're going to pay all the bills because you're young. So something has to give. Now, why was the political message of less value 10 or 15 years ago? Because we were still living on borrowed time and borrowed money and a lot of wealth. This country has been the wealthiest country ever. We have been the freest country, and we've been very, very prosperous. We had the strongest currency. We had the most gold. And what is happening today, 1988? The deficits are out of control. We have borrowed to the hilt. We are the largest debtor nation in the world, and we're facing serious problems. The currency is weak, and something has to give. No longer can we live on past accumulated wealth. No longer can we continue to borrow from around the world. That's coming to an end. It's an end of an era. You know, the interesting thing about 1988, I was asked to do this in 1980 and 1984, and I said the time wasn't quite right. 1988 is the right time to present these views, the alternative. The Reagan era is gone. It's over. So no matter how much you might believe in the Reagan revolution and the Reagan era, it's over and done with, and it failed. I was a Reagan supporter. I went to the convention as a Reagan delegate in 1976, and I championed so much of what he said. But I champion nothing that has been accomplished. Nothing has been accomplished. The tax bill, I would concede that was a good bill, that tax rate reduction, that's okay. But revenues have gone up, spending has gone up, The deficit has skyrocketed. The national debt has skyrocketed. Our intervention overseas is worse than ever. Our defense is no better than it's ever been. And the interference and the invasion of our private lives, whether it's financial privacy or personal privacy, is worse than ever. So therefore, we are now being challenged, not because I say so, and not because the libertarians are here, but because the era is ending. The bankruptcy is here, and we are delivering this wonderful gift to you. And you're going to have a choice as young people what to decide. You can put up with what you're doing here and just keep working, because you're going to have to work awful hard. You're going to have to pay a lot of Social Security into a system that you're probably not going to get anything out of. And you can pay a lot of taxes, but you'll never pay off the debt. And if we are moving into a slump, you're going to have to worry about where you're going to get a job. So it's very, very important. If the stock market crash had meaning, which I believe it did, we have to decide, well, what do we do to prevent a depression? Do you know the inflation of the money supply, which is the basic cause of the boom period, was twice as much under the Reagan administration as it was in the 1920s. So it's not surprising to find out that the stock market crash was twice as bad. That means that if we don't do the right things, or if we continue to do the wrong things, you can expect the depression to be twice as bad also. So that means that you not only have an obligation to think about this in theoretical terms, but you have an obligation to decide about this for very practical reasons. And what are the questions you have to ask and then try to find answers, which you should be doing in this election year because it's a critical election year. The questions you should ask me and ask yourself and ask the other candidates is something fundamental. Not, what am I going to get? There's no more getting. There's nothing there left. Government gives you nothing. Government only takes from one person and gives to somebody else. So never let anybody use the fact that government's going to give you something. Only taxpayers, people who are productive, give you things because they have things taken away from them. So you have to ask, we have to reassess our values. This is the point of 1988. There will be a reassessment. There will be a realignment. But it could be in a dangerous direction or it could be in a very healthy direction toward freedom. The question is, what is the role of government? What is the purpose of government? Should the government be regulating and controlling the economy? Should they be in charge of a money supply where it has no meaning, no definition, and the politicians can print it? I mean, we have a system of government today that says the politician gets reelected by voting for things for the people. And the more he votes for them, the more likely he is to be reelected. Deficits don't have any meaning because they send the bills to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve prints up all the money and creates the credit. Can you imagine giving the power of the printing press to anybody in this room? I mean, everybody would call it counterfeit and would want to put them in jail. But what do? We turn them over to the politicians and the bankers. And yet the politicians and the bankers rate the lowest on the popularity scale. But we as an American people, and you and I, have to make a decision. Is that what we want from our government? Do we want them to continue to intervene and to spend and regulate and run a welfare state? Of course, the libertarian answer is very clear. We don't want that. We want what was intended in this wonderful experiment. You know, freedom. Freedom has only been tested that much in all of history. Just a small amount of it. The best experiment was here, but the test is running its course. And if we don't reassess our values, and if we don't reassert them, you can expect this experiment to disappear. And that's what this is telling us now today about the stock market crash and the financial crisis that we're on the verge of. So what should the role of government be? If it isn't to regulate the economy, and if it isn't to tell you how to be a better person, what is the purpose of government? Well, we have to start off with a fundamental premise about rights. What are rights? To me, individual rights means that every one of us has a natural, God-given right to our life and to our liberty and to the fruits of our labor. And government has the only obligation, the only reason we bring government into effect is to guarantee that you have a right to your life, the right to your liberty, and the right to the fruits of your labor. And that's it. But most people now think, well, government's there to give us our freedoms, to provide for us, to take care for us, to give us food stamps, build our houses, give us medical care, give us an education. And this whole idea of rights has been completely distorted in the 20th century. So when we lost our way by losing the definition of what rights are, then we literally set the stage in a philosophic sense for Republicans and Democrats to endorse one system of government, the government of intervention. Yes, different flavors and different weights on different interventions, but government intervention. And that's only a 20th century phenomenon, especially since the Woodrow Wilson era. Since that time, we have had the expansion and the rapid growth of the welfare state. That is, the transfer of wealth from one group to another. Those who produce must take care of somebody else, not because they're being generous, but because the government holds a gun at their head and says, if you don't pay your taxes, you're going to jail. It has gotten so bad now, and it has been so serious of problems in this country, we have more than a third of our people participating in the underground economy. Which means they say, I'm sick of it all. I'm copping out. I'm opting out of the system. I'm not going to pay the taxes and follow the regulation because I'm tired of it all. I, as a political activist, says that is not the answer. The answer has to be, as long as we have the freedom to come together, people like myself allowed to express myself, to be running for Congress and to get elected and run for president means that we have to go through the political process of not disobeying the law, because a nation disobedient law cannot survive. But is to change the law, to get rid of the bad laws, to obey the Constitution, to have sound money, to have free enterprise, and to have your civil liberties. But to find the civil liberty is certainly different. So therefore, government is there for the guarantee of something which is a natural gift to you, a God-given gift to your life to be left alone. Therefore, the government cannot be in the business of welfare. So we, on principle, on ethical, moral, constitutional principles, reject the whole notion of the transfer of wealth because we consider it theft. If you as an individual can't steal from your neighbor, why is it that we have come to accept the idea that we can send our congressman to do the stealing for us? So under those circumstances, you can expect nothing more than more problems and more deficits. We have come to accept the idea that we can send our congressman to do the stealing for us. So under those circumstances, you can expect nothing more than more problems and more deficits and more spending. The purpose of government should be to guarantee your liberty. Now, if we guarantee your liberty as an individual, that means you have civil rights to live your own lifestyle. You actually can do things that I might disapprove of, but I'm very tolerant. As a libertarian, I say, well, I might not endorse your lifestyle. You may smoke some things and drink some things and eat some things and act certain ways that I totally abhor. But as long as you don't hurt anybody else, I'm not going to bother you. You actually literally have the right to be self-destructive in this situation. But if government assumes the role of protecting you against yourself or protecting you against what you smoke, literally they have to get rid of alcohol and tobacco and caffeine and limit calories and put you all on exercise programs and all this. Complete nonsense. But we don't want that, so we just apply those principles across the board consistently to everything. And as long as you don't hurt other people, drinking is okay, but drunk driving isn't okay. And there's a distinction between that, but we allow you to participate in activities that we might not ourselves endorse. So therefore, personal lifestyles are your own business, and also what you read and what you study and what you look at is your own business, and also your religious beliefs. We would never, as libertarians, ever conceive of the notion that some religion could be called a cult, and therefore you would have a different tax advantage, which is going on all the time, and we've prosecuted against certain religious cults because our government decides, well, they're not really religions. That does not happen in a libertarian society. But the purpose then of government would be to guarantee that liberty, but what kind of a market economy would you have then? You would have to have a free market. You'd have to have a free enterprise system because all associations, all transactions would be voluntary. The buyer and the seller has to come to a mutual agreement. The employer and the employee, two people get together and have a mutual agreement. Nobody is ever compelled to accept anything they don't want to. And once the agreement is made, they have to fulfill the agreement. There has to be some respect for the personal agreement. So what kind of an economy? There has to be a free market. Now, we defend that morally and constitutionally, but the magnificent part about this is the practical, and that is that's the most prosperous society. That's why we have been the richest country. That's why, tragically, in many ways, the interventionists, the government people, the planners, the welfarists have gotten away with so much, It's because freedom has given us so much. But they're using it, but they've expended it, and now we're broke. So that's why the reassessment has to come in. The wonderful part about this whole philosophy of individual rights is that you will have an economy that will produce the greatest amount of abundance, the least amount of poverty and suffering. It's very clear if you look at the government records, the record of the government programs. If you have the government in housing, you get less houses. More people are homeless. If you give them food stamps, more people are hungry. If you give them medical care, the higher the cost of the medical care, the worse the medical care. If you have government running education, the worse the education gets. It's systematic. This can be applied in foreign policy as well. If we're not interventionists with you as individuals, and you can do as you choose, and we apply this to economics and you have free market, if we apply this to the military and to foreign policy, you come up with the same solution. We do not interfere. We do not intervene for ethical, moral reasons as well as constitutional reasons, but what are the practical results? The practical results of a non-interventionist foreign policy is a lot better chance for peace. You know, we never fought any foreign wars prior to the 20th century. Something, you know, happened in this 20th century. We changed our foreign policy. We changed our monetary system. We changed our tax system. Since Woodrow Wilson, we've had the income tax, we had the Federal Reserve System, and we had a foreign policy that Woodrow Wilson defined as make the world safe for democracy. Has the world been safe? Has it been democratic? It's more socialist, communist than ever before, and we're broke. We can't even afford it anymore. But it is not a good policy because it doesn't work. It always backfires. And what did we do with the Philippines? The Philippines is a perfect example of the disaster of our foreign policy. Can you expect the Republicans or the Democrats to change it? No, it's identical. It'll stay the same. It's been that way for 50 years. And that is send money. And if it gets out of hand and the communists look like they're going to take over, send the kids. Would you let the Philippines follow the communists, they would say? Send the kids. Grab up the 18 and the 19-year-olds. Give them a rifle. Go to the jungles. Go to the marshes of the Philippines. Save the world from communism without reassessing the values. Why is there a major chance for the communists to win in the Philippines? Because the Republicans and the Democrats have been sending money for decades to Marcos, a hated dictator who finally was kicked out. At the same time we gave money to Marcos, causing resentment among the people of the Philippines, causing poverty in the Philippines, then we came along with another government intervention which made it even worse. That intervention was putting a tariff on the sugar so that they were then even more impoverished. No wonder there was resentment against the Americans. No wonder there's growth of communism. And now, what will the answer be? Republican or Democrat? Will be to draft the young people and tax you even more. Our answer to this is prevent it. Change the policy. Look at what the Founding Fathers said. Don't get involved in entangling alliances. If there's any one thing I would like to suggest to you as a young group, is to reassess what we've done, to reassess what you're getting. It's your country. You are free individuals. You're allowed to run for office. You're allowed to participate. You're even allowed to become libertarians. You should reassess and say, what about these treaties? Are they any good? You know, we were attacked in Pearl Harbor. We went to war, we won the war, and you'd never know it. Japan now owns Waikiki Beach. And we're paying for all their defense. And they're killing us in the market. They lower their taxes, they subsidize their export, and we never stop. Their oil supply gets threatened in the Persian Gulf, so what do? We rush over there to protect their oil supply and endanger, really, the true free flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf. It's been much more dangerous since our Navy's been there. It's a foreign policy of folly. It's a foreign policy designed for war. And it's an economic policy designed to cause recession, depression, protectionism, and isolationism, and that's what we're going to get unless we change our values. Your job will be to decide what should the role of government be, what can we offer, do we have to live up to all those treaties, can we get out of those treaties, can we have a different foreign policy, should the role of government be there to guarantee that you can make a living again, or is it going to guarantee that every year your Social Security tax is going to go up, and every year your income tax is going to go up? That's what you're inheriting. So I challenge you to think about these issues and decide that there is a better way. And the better way is a wonderful, beautiful philosophy. It's the philosophy of freedom. something that was introduced to America a couple hundred years ago and was in many ways outlined in the form of our Constitution. I think it would be quite proper that this year we read the Constitution. I think we should read it every 200 years, whether we like it or not. Let's look at the Constitution, figure it out, sit down and read it, and decide whether that's the kind of government you want. I happen to believe in limited government. I happen to believe in individual freedom, not only because of the moral principle behind it, but for the humanitarian aspects of what libertarianism brings. It brings a prosperous, free society. It brings you honest money. It brings you full employment. It brings you a system of government that allows people to have an incentive to get ahead. And most importantly, at least highly important, is the fact that it's the system of government that allows us the best chance for peace. And certainly in this age where we are threatened with a nuclear holocaust, we certainly don't need 20 or 30 or 40,000 more nuclear warheads. I think 100 or 2 of those might be plenty. And therefore, there's no reason to continue with this process of ever building up. So I say, look into these, make your decision, and please come down on the side of voting for freedom, vote for liberty, vote for the libertarians. I thank you very much. Now I think we will have enough time for some questions and some challenges. I'm sure there are some of those ideas that you have not heard of, and you'd be quite willing to challenge me.
You said you would not oppose such things as freedom of religion and to drink or whatever. What about minors and stuff? How do you feel about minors doing stuff like that?
Okay, he asked a very important question. Would we treat children differently than adults? Yes. I personally think that's a different ballgame. Children, belong to a family, and parents have the responsibility. But on all these things, I would say that things should be restricted because children can't make adult decisions. So if it has to do with drinking alcohol or smoking marijuana or whatever, I do not believe children should be involved. The same way with pornography, too. There should be a different system whereby children should be treated in such a way that we recognize that they're not able to make adult decisions.
Consider a child to become an adult at what age?
That is not easy. We certainly consider a young person adult enough to drive a vehicle at the age of 16. They claim everybody's adult enough to die needlessly at the age of 18. So I think that it may vary from state to state. That would be a state determination, but somewhere in the 16 to 18-year range would be the period of time when we would decide that a person could make adult decisions.
How does a libertarian philosophy deal with the questions of sexual freedom in this supposed age of AIDS?
How do we deal with the question of sexual freedom? Well, if we deal with it outside of the context of the problem of AIDS, sexual freedom is sexual freedom. I mean, we do not invade the bedroom. We have no laws against any type of sexual activity except the general principle that no force ever be used. That again doesn't mean that we condone what might go on, but it means that we would not have a law that that would require that we invade the bedroom and regulate it. Now, in the area of AIDS, it's clearly spread in such a way that most people can figure out how AIDS is spread and is not spread casually. But handling the problem of AIDS, I think, can be handled in a free market libertarian way differently than anybody else has proposed. First thing is I think the government should be out of it. The government has no ability to really regulate lifestyles and to do anything to prevent AIDS. Therefore, problems that are difficult to solve, we certainly don't want to turn them over to the government because they usually make these problems much, much worse. There shouldn't be government quarantines. But there certainly should be your right as an individual to quarantine yourself. Otherwise, you can discriminate against somebody who has AIDS. You don't have to associate with them. We would protect the businessman who might not want to hire somebody with AIDS. This whole idea that an AIDS victim has AIDS victims' rights. This is this distorted idea about civil liberties. There's only one kind of rights. There's no such thing as minority rights or women's rights. There's only individual rights, and everybody should be treated equally, and everything has to be voluntary. But with AIDS, the businessman, the employer, has the right to protect himself if he wants. If it's his desire, he can sever the contract or not enter the contract and say, look, I don't want to deal with you. And he has the right to do that. You know, it's so bizarre today that some of the laws in the court rulings indicate that if you have hepatitis, you're not allowed to work in a restaurant. But if you have AIDS, you can't fire the person. That's the kind of inconsistency that wouldn't occur in a libertarian society. But you would be not compelled to associate with AIDS victims, and you should be protected against them if they are a threat to you through the voluntary means in a contractual arrangement. But no government quarantines, no compulsory testing, no force by the government. There's any? Yes.
I'd like to jump to your economic policies. And it seems to me that historical facts of the 1920s and 1930s seems to indicate that a free enterprise system led to the Depression, and the more that Hoover used free enterprise and the more right he went with his economic policy, the harder the Depression came. Could you come to terms with that?
Yes, I love that question. Because you are really, and I'm not saying this you know, in a personally critical way, but you are expressing one of the common myths of 1980 college education. But I would recommend one textbook, because I can't fully answer this. I'll do my best. There's one textbook that if you're interested in that, and if let's say you took the position that you're asking me about and you're challenging me, and you want to really refute it, you have to read one textbook called The American Great Depression by Murray Rothbard. Because he turned me around, because I was raised to believe exactly as your question implied, is that capitalism and the gold standard caused the Great Depression. And that Herbert Hoover was a free market person who perpetuated the Depression because he was demanding capitalism and the gold standard and free markets. Nothing could be further from the truth. The full explanation of the business cycle has not occurred until the 20th century by von Mises, who was the 20th century leader of the Austrian school. Of course, he's the one that explains that the business cycle is caused by the Federal Reserve System. Creation of credit, the contraction of credit, the boom and the bust. So you have to look at monetary policy of the 1920s, again under a Republican administration. Rapid monetary expansion, inflation. Don't ever believe for a minute that inflation is price increases. That is one of the consequences of inflation. Inflation is the increase in the supply of money and credit. So we had the inflation of the 20s, that was setting the stage. We had the contraction of the credit by the Federal Reserve in 1929. They precipitated the crash. And then there was deflation. There was deflation because we were still loosely linked to the gold standard. But if you go back and look at what Hoover did, he did everything, maybe not as efficiently as Roosevelt did, but he imposed a lot of government restrictions and restraints, introduced a lot of the programs that Roosevelt just made much bigger. So he was a first of our presidents since George Washington ever to impose government intervention in the economy trying to take care of the Depression. In 1921, for instance, 10 years before, there was a depression, but it lasted 6 to 12 months because the government just kept their hands off. But Hoover did not keep his hands off. The inflation of the money supply was the main culprit. Look at the history of the business cycle since the creation of the Federal Reserve, since 1913. We had the inflation of the war, Depression of 21, the inflation of the 20s, Depression of the 30s, and a business cycle all the way through. Great crash of 1987. It's on and on. But I suggest that you read Murray Rothbard. It's a great book, and I'm convinced he'll convert you as he converted me.
Are you talking about Hoover's policies, like in helping the banks, or what other policies? Government
intervention. He kept wages up, and he had farm programs and different things. He had many, many different programs that he introduced. But the artificial keeping up of wages, where the correction wasn't allowed to occur. So very many of these programs he introduced.
You said, I was reading your literature here, and you said that space exploration should be open to the public and all. Does that mean you don't want the government to be in it? And what about things like scientific research and stuff? Would there be government grants for that, or would it have to be privately funded?
On yes and no on that, and I'll sort it out. The space program, when it's for only economic development and when it's subsidizing companies that want to put up satellites, no, the government shouldn't be involved in that. But space technology, I think, is a legitimate defense expenditure, knowledge of space, because we live in a space age. It makes a lot more sense to me to bring World War II type foot soldiers home from Japan and put more money into a space defense system. That, to me, seems to be logical. On an R&D, only for the purpose of national defense, R&D ought to come from business people and universities and the people who should be involved. It should never be political. Politicians, believe me, all you have to do is go down to Washington and you'll find out politicians are always political. I mean, they're not wise. They don't have great wisdom of knowing who should get the research funds. So I would say that it'd be much better off, there'd be a lot more funds, that would be the magnificent part about it. The country would be wealthier, the corporations wouldn't be in debt, and they're more likely to fund the universities. So they shouldn't be in it just for the sake of research. But if it's space technology, yes, I would believe that there would be certainly some of that in a libertarian society.
Yes. I agree a lot with what you say about humanitarian policy at home, but I don't see the practical application of a libertarian president in the United States. I think it would be too much of a shock for the entire world to have one of the greatest countries ever to change in such a radical way. And, you know, the American way is such a balance. You say the Constitution is, you know, we should go back to what the Constitution said. Well, they had no idea what they were getting into. They left some room for growth. They had no idea what would happen. And I just don't see the practical application of a libertarian president.
Okay, but they really didn't leave room to destroy the principle of freedom, you know, the concept of individual rights and the purpose of government. You say it would be a radical change. I think the extremists are in government. How can you say somebody who wants a balanced budget is a radical extremist and wants these radical changes when we get a conservative president that gives us, triples the national debt in 6 years and runs up a deficit in 1 year of $220 billion. That to me is extremism and is very dangerous. You say, well, they might not be able to accept these changes from the status quo, which I would grant there would be some changes. But you shouldn't compare that to the problems of accepting these changes. You ought to compare it to what it's like when all the people of this country get a Social Security check and it doesn't buy anything. Look at what happens when you have inflation of 20 or 30 or 40% in a year, or unemployment rates at 25%. That's what you have to compare it to. We have to prevent these great problems coming by offering up sound economic policies. So I think the real calamity is not doing anything. Yes, there's going to be adjustments, but it's sort of like you telling me that the drug addict doesn't want to get off drugs because he gets sick, he gets uncomfortable, and, you know, he doesn't feel good when he's trying to get off drugs. Certainly he doesn't feel good. And the economy is not going to feel real good when you quit feeding it deficit financing and inflation. But what happens to the drug addict if he doesn't stop? He dies. And that's the kind of a system we have here today. Now, if you say that that's all poppycock, if you say, no, I don't agree with that, we have a healthy economy, and you believe that nonsense of the supply-siders, then you just sit back and forget about it because everything is going to be okay. Instead of this being something threatening, to me, I see this as conciliatory and the only compromise that can work. Let me give you an example. The Democrats and the Republicans are always arguing about the budget deficits, and they always get together because they both endorse government spending, one for big business and military-industrial complex, the other for poor man's welfare. And they get together and they always raise both. I mean, it always happens. It never really gets cut. The libertarian is the only one that has a reasonable chance of going to the conservative and say, you know, I do support you. I think you're on the right track on free enterprise and that welfare is out of control. And I can go to the liberal and say to the liberal, yes, I agree with you. There's too much spending in the Pentagon. So I can bring these people together where the conservative and liberal, all they're going to do is bicker and they're going to raise it. And I'm also convinced for what I've stated earlier that under the system of non-intervention, you're less likely to have war and conflict.
It seems that the libertarian ideology is very caring, but yet how is the Libertarian Party going to take care of the people that cannot provide for their own individual freedoms, like let's say the old or the mentally retarded or the handicapped? I mean, if you abolish the welfare system, who's going to take care of those people?
Well, the first thing is you'd have a lot less. I mean, if government intervention takes a country that has a 3% need and turns it into a 20% need, so we've immediately eliminated 17%. Your question is there will always be somebody in need. Well, we cannot violate our principles. We cannot violate the Constitution. And we think that if we get involved with the government, we're going to make the problem worse. So we don't even think about that. We think that people are more likely to be taken care of if the country is prosperous and they have jobs. So therefore, it will take a charitable nature. The families have to do it, the communities have to do it, the church has to do it. But you have a much better chance. It isn't going to be utopia. But at least you wouldn't have abject poverty and suffering in business cycle and stock market crashes. I mean, the alternative is so much better, but far from utopia. I mean, I'm not proposing utopia, but what I'm saying is there's going to be a much better chance for you to help take care of that problem because you're likely to have a job in a libertarian free market. So therefore, you can help take care of some people.
Yeah, I was wondering if you'd expand a bit on your comment about that you don't care if what people choose to smoke. I was wondering, does that mean you're opposed to like national campaigns such as Just Say No that tries to educate the youth against the use of drugs and the problems that arise?
I've been very much involved in drug education in my local community. My wife works a whole lot, and we've raised 5 children that didn't use drugs. And I, as a physician, work very hard to, deal with the drug problem. So my motivations and my efforts have been there. I would always say that is the way. Just Say No programs is great, but I would never use taxpayers' money to do it. What I would do is get what so many have already done. Movie stars and athletes have been participating, and I'm sure I hope they don't get a lot of money for those ads. My assumption would be that they feel strongly about this and they're doing something to try to get people to just say no. I think that's a wonderful system, and that's the way it should be. But this drug culture is a reflection of a societal problem rather than the lack of strong laws. I mean, just look at the drug problem. That is a disaster. All the money that we're spending doesn't do any good whatsoever. Our CIA has been known to be a dealer in drugs and involved with drugs. The drug laws have literally been accused of being the cause of 50% of our crime in this country. The terrorist nation love the drug laws because they can make so much money off the drugs. The drug dealers, what would you do if they didn't have drug laws? The drug dealers would all be out of business. I mean, it is such a disaster. And there's no evidence whatsoever to prove that there's more drug usage because if they were legal. Matter of fact, again, back to 1914, I think it was 1914 of the Harrison Act. Before that, Americans smoked coke and drank coke and did all the stuff. And I mean, we weren't a nation of heroin addicts, even when there weren't laws against it. So that is a serious social problem. My argument would be, I don't condone any of that, but I would say the solution comes a different way, without coercion. If there's somebody holding their hand in the back, I can't quite see them. Let's try back here.
Can we have countries that are equally and stuff all around the world, and we could have freedom and do what we want to do and stuff?
I can't quite hear that question. If somebody wants to state it for me, if they heard it.
Can we have equally countries all around the world and have freedom and do what we want to do?
Well, we could hope that, and I think the best way to have freedom around the world is for us to set a good example. Just like an individual in a community, he can't go into somebody else's house and tell them how they should live, but a leader in a community can set an example so others may follow. So we as a country, whether it has to do with an economic system or a monetary system or the way we act and behave, and that is following the rules of freedom. If we set a good example and show that it's worked, others will follow us. If we as a leader, and we are, if we set the example that we should run our economy poorly and inflate the currency and cause a lot of problems, others follow us too. So the best way to spread freedom around the world would be to set a good example.
Would that mean that you'd want to pull away from being like a counterbalancer force against the Soviet Union, like pull away from NATO? Because that's what you were saying, but you were giving like Japan as an example of a country that doesn't have a strong defense because it's written in their constitution, but then we strongly help NATO and stuff, and we are the active force against communism in the world. What would you say about that?
I think the best way to develop a stronger anti-communist position is to accept the libertarian position. I think the current position is very, very weak. There's a lot of talk about anti-communism, but quite frankly, if you look at the record, you will find out that funding of the communists did not go down under the Reagan administration. All administrations continue funding to the Soviet bloc nations. And now that we've signed this treaty with the Soviets, they are going to now get even more funding. The foreign policy that I described earlier, where we disrupt these countries, that literally sets the stage for communism to grow. A libertarian president would certainly clean out the State Department. I mean, I would not have a State Department. Of course, I would have a very small State Department, but I certainly would get rid of the left-leaning members of the State Department who support governments like Mozambique. No, and I don't believe we need to be in NATO. I think that there's very strong evidence, a lot of writing on this today by many individuals. And there's a book out, it says, it's entitled How NATO Weakens the West. And literally, the more you subsidize them, the more dependent they are on us. If we would back off, I think Europe would become much stronger, much more self-sufficient, and there may be 3 powers in the world, which to me would be a benefit rather than 2 conflicting powers. You want to follow up?
Well, that's an interesting idea about the European community, but I would think that you would have to worry about a conventional force sweep, or even something worse than that, where we would lose Europe. As a it's better to have people that are semi-supportive of us there than people that would not at least support us.
Okay, you have a legitimate point. I don't happen to agree that that's what would happen, but let's assume that you are right. The next question you have to ask is, let's say that there is a sweep. The Soviets moved into West Europe. Are you willing to give your life, and ask everybody in this room to give their life to go and fight the cause? Do I have, as a politician, the right to confiscate your life and send you over there in the name of preserving freedom in America when it might not have anything to do with America? It may be a just cause, but just as not smoking and not drinking and using drugs is a just cause, that doesn't allow me, the government, to be involved. Just because there's somebody poor doesn't give me the right to intervene in the economy. So these just causes, I think it would be a just cause if the communist government was overthrown in the Soviet Union right now. But the just cause is not a legitimate excuse for doing this. I happen to believe that strategically it would not happen, but even if it did, I would say that I'm not going to draft you to do it.
What about keeping our nuclear forces over there, so then the likelihood of this happening would be less so?
Again, if there's going to be a fight over there, I'd just as soon us not be involved. So I would say the nuclear forces need to be here. They turn on us. The French have already turned on us. The Spanish are throwing us out even this very month. They've asked us to take out our 72 F-16s that we have had there. They don't even appreciate us. We decide, erroneously by the way, to go down and bomb Gaddafi for something that nobody proved in the court what he did. We go down there and kill his kid. And we try to fly over Europe, and they won't even let us. So we buy nothing. We buy nothing but debt for you in this so-called idea of protecting Europe for the safety of the world. It doesn't work. I think Europe would be much stronger by saying to the Europeans, look, we're going to leave in 5 years. We're going to save some money, and we believe you can take care of yourself. France has been doing it. Spain doesn't want us there any longer, and we're just coming home. And I believe it is the best way. And even if, again, if you don't agree on the principle of it, I mean, we have to do some cutting. There's no money left, and something has to be cut back. And again, there's no way. Reagan lost the argument. He said, we'll cut welfare and raise the military. Well, welfare wasn't cut and the military went up. So the liberals might get in and say, well, we're going to cut military and raise the welfare. I say the only answer is the libertarian, who would come up with a sensible economic policy and a sensible foreign policy and say, let's get back to basic economics and use the arithmetic.
I see your logical thought pattern, but still, I see a world that would develop where it would be, the whole world would be, if you're just so far into letting the scenario would be that the Soviets would run rapid, so then the whole world would be us against them.
Well, that I don't believe, because I don't think the communist system is strong enough to feed themselves. But you have to defund them. I mean, we continue like Solidarity was about to be a major political force, and what did the Reagan administration immediately do? Through the Export-Import Bank and the Commodity Credit Corporation, they ran to bail out the government of Poland. Why? Because they cared about freedom? No, to protect the bankers that the Polish government owed money to. That's what directs your foreign policy. It has very little to do with communism, the threat of communism. Why did we invade Grenada? To stop communism? No, it was to cover up the disaster in Beirut, to cover up that major disaster. Why do we continue to fund them if they're serious about it? Take away all the funds. They can't even feed themselves. They can't even win in Afghanistan. But they're going to do a lot more as long as we support them, and we're getting ready to send them more money. That's why the treaty is so bad. Up on top.
Yeah, maybe you addressed this. I came in a little late. How do you deal with the fact that you're so unelectable? So unelectable. I mean, I haven't heard of your name.
I'm not convinced yet.
So you're not. I think many people I haven't even heard your name until tonight. You're not out milking cows.
But you'll never forget it.
You're not out milking cows. You're not out on the trail. You really feel you have a great chance? I mean, maybe there are people who like your ideas.
No, I think there are a lot of people who do, because we've done some testing. And you have a good point. I think I'm not going to be naive and say that I'm on the verge of victory. But if we take these positions and line them up and don't put any labels on them and just ask you, you believe in free enterprise? Do you believe in individual liberty to lead your life as you want to? And do you believe we ought to change our foreign policy where we don't get suckered in and pay for all the defense of all our rich allies and continue to support communism and the banker system? The American people, yes, 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 there are 80–90% who agree with these ideas. But as soon as we put labels on them and we talk about a political system and voting, yes, we have a difficult time. But that's what this year is all about. The party's been around since 1972. It was the first time we had a nominee. We were on 2 ballots. We're expecting to be on 100 ballots this year. I expect to be in the debates. I was in New York yesterday. I had an hour interview with Bill Buckley. Things are just coming together for us. C-SPAN's been very generous. They've covered the race. Cable News Network has covered the race. No, I'm not on the evening news. But I am also convinced that there's a serious problem in this country and that we have some very serious, thoughtful answers to the problem. So it takes work and effort. It takes a political movement. But the best ally we have for accomplishing what we're trying to do are the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, they're just doing a wonderful job for us because everybody's getting so turned off. And, I mean, Gary Hart's the leader of the Democrats today. And what kind of Reaganite is going to believe George Bush is going to fulfill the role that Ronald Reagan couldn't even fulfill? I mean, people aren't voting anymore. They're very disgusted. The turnouts are lower than ever. Very few people identify themselves as Republicans or Democrats. And here we are in the midst of caucuses and early primaries. And we're dealing with 5 and 10% of the people participating. The majority of the people are thinking along these lines, but your point is correct. I haven't gotten the message out yet, but that's my whole purpose, the intention and the goal, of course. And if the people want it, and it will certainly help, I believe I deserve to be on the debates come November, October, November, whenever the debates occur. And I think it's very important. I think the American people, they don't necessarily deserve me, but they deserve to hear the ideas that I'm talking about.
This relates to the history of your party, which started in 1971. I came and listened to Ed Clark back in 1980 and supported him, voted for him in the election. And the question relates to during your candidacy and prior to that, you were elected to the Congress, and your voice was actually heard during that period of time. I mean, you were actually able to vote, able to vote and make a decision. If you're not elected, and if members of your party are not elected, then that voice is not heard. Why would these people here, myself or anyone else, try to get involved in that political process where the odds are greatly enhanced if they get involved in a political party where if they are elected, their voice will be heard?
I don't think their voice will be heard, and I think their vote will be wasted, because there is no difference between the two parties. They both endorse the philosophy of intervention. And no matter whether you vote for the conservative or the liberal, if you vote for the conservative to reduce deficit, it doesn't happen. Or if you vote for the liberal to decrease the chances of a war, that won't happen either. So they're wasting their votes. So therefore, their only option is to join us and work in our efforts until we are elected.
The parties right now, you're correct. I don't see a lot of difference in a lot of those members, but your party itself has members like yourself and Russell Means. If people that, as far as the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, if I have a libertarian attitude, which I do, and I'm a member of a political party, it seems to me if I am elected to a state legislature or whatever political process I would be in, that it would be greatly enhanced.
Well,
that's my point.
If that is your point, that if you say that you might be considering running for office and you have very libertarian views, does that mean that your only option would be to come and join the Libertarian Party? I think I have to be realistic, because I've done both, and I ran as a Republican with libertarian views and hopefully had some positive influence and a positive impact. And yet the decision I made was a personal one, which is important. So if somebody else, if they're believing the same thing and they're going to go about it a different way, I'm not going to have a lot of strong criticism, especially if they're successful. But my reason for changing was historical, in the sense that I believe in looking at monetary history, since I've studied a lot of monetary history, is that big things are about to happen. And therefore, I don't want to, I could have stayed in the U.S. Congress as a Republican, but I wanted to make more points and to deliver the message differently. I want to have more of an impact. It doesn't mean that that individual who has libertarian views that would run and get elected, I cannot be critical of that, but I think the real impact has to be, especially for me, to say that the message of freedom, the message of liberty, has to be delivered to the American people in a different way than through the Republican Party.
I'm sure you all have more questions, but time is a scarce resource, so I'd like to take this time to thank Ron Paul for coming here.
It's great. I really enjoyed being with you. Thank you.